Cleopatra, you know the name, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Her life was this incredible story of power, love, and war. But it's her death, really, that has obsessed us for over 2,000 years. It's this epic final act, but it's also a huge historical mystery. So what actually happened in her final hours? Let's get into it.
The story we all know is just unforgettable. She's been defeated by a Roman rival, Octavian, and she's trapped in her palace. So, to avoid the ultimate humiliation, being dragged through Rome in chains, she has an asp, an Egyptian cobra, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. She lets it bite her, and she dies, a queen to the very end. I mean, it's dramatic, it's symbolic, it's the perfect ending. But is that perfect ending the truth? See, even ancient historians weren't totally convinced, and modern experts, they're even more skeptical. The story we all think we know might just be a fantastic piece of propaganda, a carefully built narrative that's been hiding a much murkier reality for centuries.
Okay, so to understand her death, we have to understand her final days. Because this wasn't just about a queen falling from power. This was the end of an entire era. It was the explosive finale to a brutal war for control of the entire Roman world.
The road to her final moments was just relentless. After her first great Roman ally, Julius Caesar, was assassinated, she teamed up with Mark Antony. Now, this powerful alliance was a direct threat to Caesar's ambitious heir, Octavian. And when Antony divorced Octavian's own sister, well, that was the last straw. War was declared, not on Antony, but very specifically on Cleopatra. Their crushing defeat at the Battle of Actium was the beginning of the end, and it led directly to Octavian's forces landing in Egypt.
And this coin right here, it shows you exactly what the big deal was. This wasn't just a romance, it was a major political power play. By putting themselves on a coin together as this kind of Greek-style royal power couple, they were basically building an Eastern empire to challenge Rome itself. For Octavian, this wasn't just a rivalry, it was an existential threat he had to crush.
The final siege of Alexandria was shockingly fast. On August 1st, 30 BC, with Octavian's army closing in, Antony's own navy and cavalry just switched sides. They abandoned him, and just like that, the war was over. For Cleopatra, there was nowhere left to run.
So, her city is captured, her armies are gone. What's her primary motivation now? Well, it wasn't just about avoiding death, it was about avoiding public shame. It was about seizing control of her own story in the face of total, absolute defeat.
And her entire state of mind is captured in this one defiant quote. See, a Roman triumph was the ultimate victory parade. The conquering general would parade the spoils of war, including, and especially, famous prisoners, through the streets of Rome. For Cleopatra, a queen who considered herself a living goddess, this was a fate literally worse than death. This single line is the key to everything she does next.
So after she's captured, Cleopatra actually meets with Octavian. He's cagey, promising to be merciful, but not really giving anything away. But then a spy confirms her absolute worst fear. Octavian is absolutely planning to take her to Rome for his triumph. And with that, her decision was made.
Her last hours were just a cascade of pure tragedy. First, Antony hears a false rumor that she's already dead, and so he kills himself. Then, Cleopatra herself is captured. Realizing her fate is sealed, she takes a bath, has one last meal, and then, with her two loyal handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, she prepares for the end.
And this, right here, brings us to the central mystery. She died. Her two attendants died with her. But how? The ancient sources, the very accounts we rely on, are all over the place. It's a genuine 2,000-year-old cold case.
Now this is maybe the most crucial detail. The one person who would have known for sure what happened, her personal doctor Olympos, he left no record of how she died. Nothing. The historian Plutarch mentions Olympos, but only brings up the snake story later as a rumor. That's a huge gap in the evidence, and it's where all the debate really begins.
Okay, so let's break down the three main theories. First, you have the famous snake bite. It's incredibly symbolic, sure, but a big cobra is hard to hide, and its venom actually causes a pretty slow, painful, and ugly death, not the peaceful end we imagine. Then there's poison, which is way more plausible, maybe a toxic ointment or a fast-acting poison injected with something like a hairpin, which a couple of ancient writers suggested. And finally, there's the theory of murder. I mean, Octavian definitely had a motive, right? But this theory goes against almost every ancient account which all agree she took her own life.
In the end, probably the most honest take comes from the Roman historian Cassius Dio. Writing a couple of centuries after it all happened, he pretty much admitted that the real story was already lost to time. He mentioned that some small puncture marks were found on her arm, but his conclusion was basically nobody really knew for sure.
So, if the truth is so murky, why did the snakebite story become the story? Well, because in history, sometimes the best story wins, not necessarily the truest one. And this particular narrative was shaped from the very, very beginning. Look, Octavian couldn't parade the real Cleopatra through Rome, so he did the next best thing. During his victory triumph, he paraded a statue of her with a snake attached to her arm. This was absolutely brilliant propaganda. He wasn't just a military genius, he was a narrative genius. He framed her death as something foreign, treacherous, and exotic, and that image stuck.
But even in Roman times, there were other versions floating around. This fresco from Pompeii probably shows Cleopatra drinking poison from a cup. It's a pretty clear sign that the debate over how she died was very much alive back then, too.
Of course, the sheer drama of the snake story was perfect for the Middle Ages. Artists completely embraced it, like you see in this manuscript. They even evolved the legend, placing her and Antony together in a tomb, this really romantic, tragic vision of their end.
Then you get to the Renaissance, and artists like the great Michelangelo turn her death into this noble, classical tragedy. The story becomes this mix of high tragedy and even eroticism, focusing on the moment of death as something that's both beautiful and completely devastating.
And modern artists kept reinterpreting her story. The incredible sculptor Edmonia Lewis chose not to show the act of dying at all. Instead, she shows us what happens after. Here's a powerful queen, even in death, sitting on her throne. It's a statement about dignity and eternal power, not victimhood.
So ultimately, the story of Cleopatra's death became a kind of canvas. Every era that came after projected its own ideas about power, women, death, and empire onto her final moments. The snake, the poison, in a way, it almost doesn't matter. The story became bigger than the facts.
But when you strip away all those layers of myth and art and propaganda, you're left with the woman herself. This portrait from Herculaneum is thought to be one of the most realistic we have of her. Not a legend, but a real ruler who was backed into a corner and made an impossible choice.
And that really brings us to the final question, doesn't it? Cleopatra chose to die so she wouldn't become a footnote in Octavian's victory story. And in doing so, she created her own immortal legend. But by leaving the cause of her death a mystery, did she accidentally hand control over to all the poets, propagandists, and artists who came after? So in the end, did she really control her story? Or did the story end up controlling her?